Hi, I'm Dr. Thomas Armstrong, and this is video number 7 in my video series based on my book, The Power of the Adolescent Brain, Strategies for Teaching Middle and High School Students, published by ASCD. As part of this series, we're looking at 8 practices that middle and high school teachers can implement in the classroom, which are in line with recent research concerning how the adolescent brain develops. In this video, we're going to focus on adolescent brain-friendly intervention number 3, taking advantage of peer learning connections. Studies reveal that adolescents consistently spend more time with peers than with adults or children, report that they're happiest when they're with their peers, and when deciding how to behave in a variety of situations, give the highest priority to peer norms. On the other hand, when peer norms become the guiding principle for a teen's conduct, it can open the door to situations where the blind are essentially leading the blind. In other words, where teens may hook up with potentially violent gangs, drug abusers, and other poor peer role models. In fact, because peer norms are so important to teens, creating positive peer connections in the classroom may be one of the best ways to promote effective learning in school. There have been a number of neuroscience studies in the past 2 decades supporting the idea that peer influence is embedded deep within the adolescent's brain, including fMRI, or functional magnetic resonance imaging, scanning of the brain, which involves detecting mental activity in the brain while subjects are involved in learning tasks. In one such study, teens played a video game called Cyberball inside the MRI machine, believing they were interacting with 2 peers outside the machine. At a certain point in the game, the subject inside the machine was cut out of the game and had to watch on the screen as the 2 players interacted with each other and excluded the subject. When this occurred, an area of the brain called the subgenual anterior cingulate began to fire, indicating that a lot of activity was going on in that area. This region is associated with acute emotional distress and has been linked to mood disorders such as unipolar depression. Essentially, the neuroscientists discovered a key area in the brain related to the neurobiology of peer rejection. In another brain scan study, adolescents were asked during an fMRI scan to respond to statements that involved social self-evaluations, such as, "Do you think I'm cool?" When they did this, an area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens lit up. This region of the limbic system, or emotional brain, is associated with rewards, motivation, and addiction. In other words, being positively evaluated by a peer during adolescence represents a kind of high, not dissimilar from taking a drug. Conversely, negative peer evaluations can be as devastating as, or more devastating than, being cut out of a game of cyberball. Because the limbic system, or emotional brain, matures much earlier in adolescence than the more rational prefrontal cortex, which doesn't fully mature until the early 20s, a bully's insults can trigger a global negative emotional response, such as the one indicated in this slide, while a more reasonable interpretation from the still maturing prefrontal cortex may not yet be available to the teen being bullied. All of this adds up to the fact that positive peer learning connections are vital to an adolescent's well-being, to their sense of self, and to their social development. In the rest of this video, we're going to look at 9 practical strategies for creating positive peer connections in the middle school or high school classroom. The first strategy involves using peer learning and teaching. When students teach each other, both sides get something out of the exchange. The one being taught learns important skills, while the one doing the teaching has to organize their thinking or metacognitive abilities in order to effectively present the material. After teaching a lesson, for example, a teacher can ask students to rank their understanding of the material on a scale of 1 to 10, and then pair those between 6 and 10 as teachers with those between 1 and 5 as students. It would be important, of course, to make sure that all students over a period of days or weeks get to be teachers and that all also have the opportunity of being taught. A second approach to creating positive peer connections is to use collaborative or cooperative learning. In this case, peers teach each other, solve problems, or plan projects in a group context. A teacher, for example, when presenting a chapter in a textbook, can jigsaw it and have different groups study the material and then present material from different sections of the chapter to the whole group. Or groups can be formed to take on long-term projects, such as developing a community-based initiative like investigating the quality of the water in a town's drinking supply. A third strategy is using peer mentoring. In this case, older students give guidance to younger students, as, for example, when 12th graders offer to provide orientation sessions to incoming 9th graders at a high school, or when an 8th grade student shows a 6th grade student in a middle school how to effectively use the library services in the school. A fourth way to use positive peer connections in the classroom involves letting peers critique each other's work. This can be as simple as having peers correct each other's papers or tests, or involve a more thorough critique of longer-term projects or papers. Students are more likely to listen to their peers' criticisms, both positive and negative, and take them to heart than if they get the same feedback from a teacher. Students should be given guidelines in advance to ensure that the feedback facilitates learning, including the advice that the feedback should be kind, helpful, and specific. A fifth strategy involves setting up a peer mediation program in the middle school or high school. Peer mediation is a process of having students judge other students who have broken school rules or violated school policies or ethical principles, such as plagiarizing or cheating on a test. Rather than turning such incidents into punitive power struggles between teachers or administrators and students, these problems can be adjudicated by peers, both in determining guilt or innocence and also in assigning an appropriate consequence or restoration for the offense. A sixth approach to positive peer learning connections involves creating small learning communities in the middle or high school. This strategy is a school-wide reform and suggests that instead of large classes and impersonal schools that tend to alienate students, the school or each grade within it be divided into smaller learning communities, each one guided by a homeroom teacher that the student can form a personal relationship with. These smaller groups can then serve as ongoing collaborative learning groups where project-based learning, critical discussions, and personalized learning can take place. One excellent book that explains how this was done in a school in Harlem in New York City is Deborah Meyer's book, The Power of Their Ideas. A seventh strategy involves developing class-wide simulations, where the classroom is turned into a total environment representing a living embodiment of the material being studied in the course. Some teachers, for example, have turned their classrooms into courtrooms or political campaign offices or model United Nations. One of my friends and colleagues, David Thornburg, took a group of students in Brazil and turned their classroom into a spaceship heading out on a journey to Mars. Still other teachers have created classrooms that mimicked historical eras, scenes from literature, or laboratories of famous scientists. These simulations facilitate cooperative and collaborative learning and help create positive new connections between peers in the classroom. The eighth strategy is actually the simplest of all 9 strategies covered in this video. It suggests that teachers provide frequent opportunities for students to share what they've learned with someone sitting next to them. For example, I've used these 2 simple questions as a framework for sharing after giving a lecture or after having students do a learning activity, reading an assignment, or engaging in some other learning experience. The time taken for this is minimal, as little as a minute or 2 for each person to share. But the frequent use of this intervention can help students who need to bounce their ideas off of another person in order to more fully grasp the idea or skill. Finally, the 9th strategy for creating positive peer connections involves having students play games together. These games can be non-tech oriented, such as board games. In fact, any concept or skill can be turned into a board game with dice and markers, such as a math game where math problems are placed on the squares that form a twisting pathway on the board, and answers are placed on index cards keyed to the problems. Increasingly, we're seeing more and more examples of quality educational video games that teach a wide range of skills and concepts. And these can also be turned into peer learning opportunities if students are allowed to play them in pairs or in small groups. If you would like more information about providing positive learning connections at the middle and high school level, or want to know about all 8 interventions that are adolescent brain friendly, get my book, The Power of the Adolescent Brain, available through Amazon or other online sources, including the publisher ASCD. You can also find the other videos in this series on YouTube. For more information about my work, go to my website, www.institute4learning.com, or contact me at thomas@instituteforlearning.com. Thanks so much for your attention. I hope this information helps you appreciate the broad range of strategies that can be used to capitalize on the adolescent brain's hunger for peer connections. If we can facilitate positive peer relationships inside the classroom, we may be helping students to carry those peer connections into their lives outside of the classroom as well.